Hi everyone. For this video I thought I'd do something a little different and look at an entire genre of cameras. What we're going to be looking at today is the sort of wide world of compact film cameras made between the 1980s and the early 2000s, and also some of the designs that have been made in the last few years. There are hundreds and hundreds of different models that you can choose from. What I've done is I've broken them into 8 different kinds or types of compact camera, and hopefully that gives you an idea of what camera might suit you if you want to buy a compact, and that will obviously depend on what kind of photography you're wanting to take, how much creative control you want, or if you just want something that's a pure point and shoot. And a few of the models that you might be able to find for hopefully not very much money. One kind of compact camera that we're going to ignore for this video is what's called the premium compact class, and that's because those cameras are getting ever more expensive as more celebrities and influencers shoot with them. I'm talking about cameras like the Contax T2 and the Nikon 35 Ti. You'll be lucky to find those cameras for less than £1,000 here in the UK. And that's an awful lot of money to spend on a camera that's, getting near 25, 30 years old. What I'll suggest instead is spending less on the camera and putting more of your budget towards buying film and processing it. The first kind of camera that we're going to talk about today is what I'm calling the modern simple camera. And this is one that I own, which is the double film show, which is pretty typical of these kind of cameras at the moment. So the cameras usually have a fixed focal length. In this case it's 32mm for the double film show, which is pretty wide angle. They have a fixed shutter speed, so in the case of the show it's I think around 1/125th, and they usually have one aperture, which is usually sort of f11, so it makes the camera basically perfect for taking pictures in strong light, summer's day at the beach, whatnot. You will also find sometimes that these come with an integral flash, and when you have an integral flash, often it has a different aperture setting. You can sometimes sort of hack these cameras by not putting the batteries in for the flash and just choosing the flash aperture, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility. So the show that you see here is pretty typical, but a lot of companies are making this. They all seem to be very similar and probably made in, if not the same factory, then maybe a few factories in China. One thing you can say about these cameras is they are really light. Apart from the plastic shell and the plastic lens, there's really not a lot going on in them, so you don't have to worry about any wrist or neck strain cutting these around all day. They're pretty small, fit in the palm of your hand, so you can just chuck them in a bag or in a jacket pocket. The other good thing with these cameras is they're being made today, so they're easy to find, and they're not particularly expensive. Most of the current designs are probably going to cost you between £35 to £60, depending on what kind of extras they come with. And they're a really good way for people who've not shot film before to sort of dip their toes without spending a crazy amount of money. Like I say, they're pretty limited features wise. The show's great for shooting in really good daylight with 100, 200 speed film. You could maybe get away with slightly cloudier conditions and sticking a roll of 400 ISO film in, but because it has that essentially fixed aperture and the fixed shutter speed, you haven't got too many parameters to work with. But great for a beginner, great for somebody who's never shot film before and just wants to try it out and see if they like it. So cameras like the double film show didn't come out of nowhere. There were all sorts of cameras built to a fairly similar specification through the 80s and 90s and 2000s. This Hanamex IC500 is pretty typical of simple compacts when they were being made back in the sort of glory days of film. Like the show, everything's pretty easy with this camera. It's got a fixed focal range and a fixed focus. You advance the film and then click the shutter, advance with your thumb, boom. And just really easy to use, very simple. Again, like one shutter speed usually and a fixed aperture. So it's not a camera that's going to give you a huge amount of variety with your shots, but you can pick these up for next to nothing. I think these Hanamexes, it'd be hard to spend more than £10 on one of these in working order. You often find them in car boot sales or at flea markets or charity shops. This kind of camera was built in the millions during the heyday of film for a sort of emerging amateur market who wanted to take pictures but didn't want to spend all of their holiday looking at a manual. One of the good things about these cameras is because they're so cheap and they're pretty reliable in terms of there's not a lot of mechanics to go wrong. Take them out, shoot what you want, and if they fall, made of plastic, so they're not particularly robust, they're cheap enough that you can replace them. I mean, often you'll be spending more on the film and processing than you will the actual camera. But, that's another option if you wanted to perhaps, find something that shoots a little like the modern Ilford branded, Kodak branded double film show kind of camera. You can find these things for a lot less money. This camera is another example of a simple compact from the sort of 90s, 2000s. This is actually a panoramic model. This is the Panorama Wide Pick. It's a bit like an APS camera in panoramic mode. What this camera has is essentially a mask on the top and the bottom of the frame, which sort of essentially turns it into a panoramic. It's not a true panoramic, but it has the same dimensions. It's basically just sort of cropping a normal frame of 35mm film, so it's just showing you the center of it. Again, like a fixed shutter speed, a fixed aperture. This is optimized for shooting in very, very bright light with 100, 200 speed film. Actual sort of high-end panoramic cameras will cost an arm and a leg if you can find them. But something like this is just quite good fun, great for taking to the beach or on a hike, or, something a bit different if you're wanting to get, street shots while you're out and about. Again, £10, like £15 maximum. The next class of camera that I'm going to be talking about is the zone focus compact. And two particularly well-known cameras in this class are the Kosmo CX2 and the camera that was based on it, the Soviet Lomo LCA. So we're going to look at the Kosmo first. It has this wonderful sort of twisting front plate. You have the camera and the lens closed and you twist it like this and the camera's ready to shoot. There's no kind of autofocus or rangefinder in here. How do you focus? Well, you focus by setting the camera to a certain distance or a zone. A lot of cameras, certainly the Kosmo and the LCA and various other ones, they have an automatic exposure system. So they'll basically choose quite a narrow aperture and good light and a fast shutter speed, so that if the zone you've set is reasonably close to the distance that your subject's at, you'll be absolutely fine. You've just basically got to get the nearest zone you can to where your subject is. In the case of the Kosmo here, you've basically got 4 zones that you can choose from, and these are pretty much a meter, 1.5 meters, so that's about 5 feet. 3 meters, it's near enough to 10 feet, and infinity. So that's the one you would choose if you wanted to take pictures of a landscape, mountain in the distance or something like that. Depending on which camera that you choose, some of them sort of translate the setting that you've chosen in the viewfinder, so it's a lot easier to check which one you've actually chosen. So these cameras, do require you to sort of pay attention to roughly how far away your subject is from the camera. Now this might sound complicated, but it's really not. I mean, there were all sorts of cameras using various types of zone focus throughout photographic history, because it was a much cheaper mechanism to build than something like a rangefinder or a reflex mirror. So it just takes a little bit of practice. After a while, you'll get to recognize what's 5 feet and 10 feet away, and you should be laughing. Another camera using this zone focus system that's based on the Kosmo, and that we're going to be talking about in a later video on Kosmo Foto's YouTube, is the infamous Lomo LCA. This was made in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. It was originally given away as a prize for delegates at a Communist Party Congress in 1985, I think. But in the 90s, it became a real cult compact because a bunch of Austrian art students discovered it in Prague in a junk shop, and became so enamored with this quirky little camera that they bought all they could and eventually restarted production in the Lomo factory in St. Petersburg. So this operates pretty much exactly like the Kosmo, apart from the mechanism to open the lens is a lot simpler. I think the designers at Lomo tried to replicate that, but just couldn't do it, to their satisfaction. So they opted for this much simpler sort of sliding cover at the bottom. I'm going to end talking about zone focus compacts with a camera that we covered in another previous video, and that's the Voigtlander Vito C. So it's got a slightly different way of opening it. It's got this very cool drawbridge style door at the front, a bit like an old 1930s folding camera. It has this focusing on the front, but in the viewfinder it has sort of various zones that kind of tell you how far away your subject is from you. It's nice to have that in the viewfinder because it just saves blurry shots or shots that are out of focus while you're learning to sort of get to grips with the zone focus system. All of these cameras, they cost a little more than this very simple compacts, but you would be hard pressed to spend more than perhaps £100 on this Voigtlander, and certainly like the Kosmo and the Lomo, you can still find those for £50. So really cool, fun compacts that are not going to cost a lot of money. The next cameras that we're going to talk about are from the very earliest era of autofocus. In the early 1970s and 1980s, camera makers had finally worked out how to create an autofocus system so that the photographer didn't have to focus using their fingers and their eye. They could just press the shutter button and the camera would work it out using electronic bells and whistles. And as the 1980s sort of wore on, you saw more compact cameras using a very primitive, early autofocus system. This camera here, this Pentax Sport, is pretty typical of them. This one came out in about 1984, 1985. It's a really simple, chunky camera. It comes with a 35mm lens, 3.5 lens, so fairly wide angle. You can see that this camera is a bit chunkier than the zone focus one, and a bit heavier, and that's because with the sort of advent of autofocus, you needed more power in the camera because you weren't just perhaps firing a light meter and an auto exposure system. You were also having to fire a lens focusing motor, And also these cameras usually came with automatic film advance and rewind. And so what you'll find with cameras like this, I don't have batteries in this one, but trust me, it's quite loud. You'll certainly notice if somebody shoots one of these next to you on the street. It took a while for camera designers to come up with ways of sort of dampening the sound of this advanced motor. They're not particularly sophisticated. This Pentax probably has maybe 3 or 4 autofocus zones, so it's a bit like a zone focus compact in some ways. In the 1990s, a lot of autofocus compacts had an autofocus system that had hundreds of different distance settings. They're much more accurate. This is still a really nice camera because the lens, it's a Pentax, the lens is really good. And it's got that sort of chunky 80s nostalgia design. But not all of these early autofocus cameras had a motor inside. So this is a slightly different model, but it is autofocus like the Pentax. This is a Minolta AFC. And this is kind of like a halfway house between the Pentax and something like the Lomo LCA, because you've got a thumb wind at the back, but you have an autofocus system for the lens. So it's sort of trapped in this weird halfway house, but quite a nice, nifty little camera. This is another good example of how much fun you can have with a relatively simple compact. This has a really great wide-angle lens. I think the Minolta AFC had a 6-element lens. More elements you have in a camera lens tends to be sharper. This is a real sleeper camera. People seem to, in the last year or two, have woken up to how cool they are. But you can still usually find them for about 100 quid, again, a fraction of the cost of these sort of premium compacts that everyone's going crazy about. So next we come to the 5th kind of camera we're going to be talking about. It's the early advanced compact. So these were cameras sort of, again, made during the sort of mid-80s, just when autofocus was starting to find its feet, but had a little more creative control than most of the sort of consumer level compacts. These were cameras that were aimed at people who maybe had taken an SLR with a few lenses or a nice zoom lens on holiday. Maybe wanted something slightly more modern, but still wanted to have a bit of control over the pictures that they were taking. The 2 cameras that I'm going to illustrate this class with are the Pentax PC35 AFM, quite a mouthful. We did a video on this in 2022, and it's an absolutely brilliant camera. And the Canon AF35M, which is sometimes referred to as the original Canon Sure Shot. Canon really made the most of the compact camera age and released dozens and dozens of different models in the Sure Shot range. They became like a worldwide sensation in the 80s and 90s. So let's have a look at the Pentax. Super 80s aesthetic. I think this is from 1984 or 85 as well. It has a protective cover on the lens, and you open it with this flash little red lever on the side. It's got that great action. This is a really chunky compact. This is not far off the size of a small SLR like the Olympus OM1 without the lens attached. Again, you've got the need for quite a bit of power because you're powering a film advance system as well as a light meter and autofocus as well. Again, like the Pentax I talked about earlier, this is not the quietest camera. You're certainly going to notice that if somebody's taking a picture of you on the street. It also has a quite annoying little beeping sound if it thinks it doesn't have enough light, which you can override, but it requires actually taking the camera apart and I think taking separating a wire from a little speaker in the top of the camera. I haven't done it because I tend to shoot this in bright light and, you know, make sure I'm not trying to take stuff in too low a light if I'm going to sort of stand out while doing it. But it has a load of different features which make it like a really flexible camera to use. So it has different ISOs that you can use. While the camera does have DX coding, which means that the camera has a mechanism where it can, you know, read off the film canister what speed the film is and shoot at the right speed. You can actually override this. So if you were to use a film that doesn't have a DX code, like Kosmo Foto Mono or some of the cinema films that are respooled, say you have a 200 speed film but you want to shoot it at 400, you can actually just set it there and completely override it. The camera will behave as if you're shooting 400 ISO film. So you can push process. That's not something you could do with a lot of cheap compacts in this era, but you can with this one. The camera also has a backlight button. So what this means is if you've got somebody standing with the light behind them, with a lot of sort of early auto exposure systems or cameras that, you know, perhaps didn't have the best flash system, you would get complete underexposure of the person because the camera would be fooled by the very bright conditions behind them. The backlight basically helps you get the right exposure for the person while sort of overexposing the background a little. Great little feature to have in a compact camera. It's not the smallest, but really, really good camera. You can still find these for about £50. Have a look at the video that we did on this back in 2022. We would go into a bit more detail on it. So the Canon is like broadly similar to the Pentax we were just talking about. It has a fixed lens like the Pentax. The Pentax is 35mm, I think, and the Canon's is 38mm. Both of these cameras have an f2.8 lens, so it means that they can open up wide to take sort of portrait style shots when the light gets a little bit lower. Like the Pentax, this is a camera that sort of wants to be heard. I mean, that's kind of loud. But it's sort of indicative of where the technology was at the time. They hadn't worked out how to sort of dampen the noise of this film advanced system. You know, this would come later. But you know, this is a really fun little camera to use. You know, not only for the fact that it sort of kick-started the sure shot range, which was, you know, this wildly successful system from Canon in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. But it's quite a robust camera. It's got a metal frame like the Pentax has. It's not something that you need to be particularly delicate with. I really like some of these early autofocus sort of fixed focal length cameras because you know, it's all about taking good pictures with a good lens. You know, the autofocus is usually, you know, fine enough to get the shot you want. It doesn't have the sophistication of later cameras, but you know, the lenses are really, really good, and you know, they usually got enough features to sort of have a bit more creative control. So now we're really getting into the space age. We're starting to look at autofocus zoom cameras from around the sort of mid to late 80s. The first designs of these cameras were coming out. They were a bit chunky and clunky at first. As you got into the 1990s, more and more of these zoom lens compact cameras were being released. Technology got better, the lenses got better, and they were able to, you know, put bigger and bigger lenses into smaller and smaller bodies, essentially. So I've got a couple of examples here, you know, good designs that sort of give you an overview of what these cameras are like. And neither of them cost particularly much money because they were both produced in quite large amounts, it seems. The first one is this Canon SureShot 70 zoom. This is another design from Canon's sort of long-running and really successful SureShot range. So you slide the cover like this, and suddenly the camera sort of sparks into life, and you've got this 35 to 70 zoom using a sort of little kicker switch on the back. You can take it in and out. But what you have here is essentially an SLR with a zoom lens and a really, really small body. This Canon has, various flash modes. You can turn the flash off. If you want a bit more creative control, you can use red eye reduction. You can have slow sync flash, all these, different settings. It's got a self timer. It's got a really, really nice lens. I am testing this camera for my online camera shop, and I was really impressed with the results. It's not a camera I'd shot with before, a few weeks ago. But as you can see, it's not particularly big. It's by this stage, the camera designers were getting really good at putting a zoom system into a relatively small body. Again, this is a camera that you can just chuck in a coat pocket or the smallest bag and take pretty much anywhere with you. Like the Canon SureShot, this is another zoom camera with a zoom lens built into the body. But this one isn't a 35 to 70 zoom. This goes all the way up to 140 mils. So a real sort of telephoto zoom lens, which is, pretty incredible given how small the camera is. Now, again, you've got that very sort of 90s, 80s, 90s compact camera whine when you use the zoom. These cameras, the zoom lens is not like the one in a sort of high-end SLR zoom. You might not have a particularly wide aperture at the furthest end of the zoom. It might be down to something like f9.5 or f11, but it'd still be perfectly fine for taking holiday shots, sort of street shots, landscapes, maybe not portraits. But at the 35, 38 mil range, it's much better, much wider aperture, so you can shoot in lower light. Samsung packed a lot of features into their compact cameras, much like Ricoh, who are another company who did, lots of compact camera designs in the 80s, 90s. So you've got, all sorts of different little modes, different flash settings, fill in flash, turn the flash off if you want to take some, moody portraits or whatever. It's even got a panoramic mode. It's got a diopter, so you can, change the viewfinder depending on, how good your eyesight is. All in this, very, very small little body, various sort of picture-taking modes at the front. These Samsungs, for instance, they might cost you 40 or 50 pounds at most, just because they're not really seen as a desirable camera like some of the sort of cult compacts. But the lens is incredible, made by Schneider in Germany, Scheider Kreuznach, who, a real premium name when it comes to lens design. And this is really no slouch when it comes to taking pictures. So, something like this, if you want an all-in-one package, essentially an SLR with a zoom lens or two zoom lenses in a body small enough that you can stick in a pocket, then, a camera like this is really worth choosing. So when it comes to cult compacts, you'll find a lot of the designs that people are getting really excited about fall into this category number 7, which I'm calling the classic point and shoot. So what I'm talking about here is sort of fixed focal length compact cameras, usually from the late 80s, 90s. And what you have here is a camera with one focal length, and in this case on this camera, which is a Canon SureShot Max, it's a 38mm lens, 38 3.5, and this camera just takes great pictures at one focal length. If you want to zoom, then you zoom with your feet. So although we're talking about a fixed focal length, we're not talking about fixed focus. Those are two different things. This is an autofocus camera. And we were speaking earlier about, the autofocus system being, a little rudimentary when things started. Maybe you had a few focus zones. Well, as the 80s turned into the 90s, the technology was getting better and better. There was more competition, more resources being put into designing and making cameras like these. So the technology was just getting better every year. So with a camera like this, the autofocus is a lot more accurate. There's more zones that it can choose from. The auto exposure system is also going to be really good. The lenses, especially in these sort of fixed focal length cameras, are really good. They're, full of contrast. They have great color rendition, not too much distortion. And they usually have, enough elements in them, glass elements, to be really sharp. So these are often a really good sort of travel camera, great for taking on the street. Like the autofocus zoom cameras we were talking about earlier, the film advance is usually dampened down by the stage, not as noisy advancing the films. And because you don't have that motor having to zoom the lens in and out, you really only have a lot of noise when you turn the camera on. So they're a bit more unobtrusive, good for taking street photography. Again, we're looking at a model from Canon's sure shot range, because this really was the sort of 600-pound gorilla of the compact camera world. They just made so many great designs that were aimed at sort of different parts of the photographic community at the time, from people who wanted, just a dead simple point and shoot to, more enthusiast photographers who wanted something with a bit more control from the photographer. We're going to look at another of the sort of high-end sure shots a bit later. But Canon, they didn't have this market all to themselves. There were lots of other companies making, cameras like this as well. So this is a pretty good example of what Olympus were coming out with at the time. This is the AF10 Super, which is a more advanced model. This is just a really good fixed focal length camera, super nice lens, great contrast, not too much distortion. You can turn the flash off if you don't want it. It's cameras like these that I think, if I was going to suggest that somebody wanting to buy a compact film camera for the first time, if they said, which one would I choose? This would probably be the class of camera that I would say, go for this. You can spend £1,000, £1,500 on the sort of Premier League premium compacts that you're going to be seeing pictures of on Instagram and photography blogs. But to be honest, a camera like this is going to get you 95% of the quality of those cameras at a fraction of the price. So this is my pick, an AF10 Super or a Sure Shot Max or something like that. £100 maximum. The last kind of camera that we're going to be talking about is something that I was initially struggling for a name for, but eventually I decided to describe these as high concept compacts. So these are cameras that tend to be, on the chunkier side. They're bigger than, many of the cameras we've already looked at. They tend to have a zoom lens, but they also tend to have better lenses than a lot of the zoom cameras that we were talking about earlier. I'm going to use this example, which is the Canon Sure Shot Zoom XL, which is a camera that came out in, I think, 1989. And Canon basically told the lens designers to make sure that the lens was as good as the lenses found on Canon FD mount SLRs from a previous generation. And if you've ever shot with Canon FD lenses, you'll know just how good those lenses are. Well, I've shot plenty of shots with Sure Shot Zoom XLs, and all I can say is, wow. I would put this in one of my top 10 cameras of all time, simply because of just how great the lens is. It's a 39 to 80mm lens. It doesn't get too narrow at the maximum end. I think it's about f7. It has these sort of zoom modes on the side, so you sort of, pressing these like a 1980s video game controller. It has all sorts of great useful features. It's got a zoom lock and a multi-exposure mode. You can turn the flash off. And this camera even has, in the bottom, a remote control. Let me see if I can get it out. Here we go. So if you want to take a selfie, you set the camera up on a wall or a tripod and you use this to take your picture and then pop it back here at the end. Nice fat strap, because this is, I wouldn't call it heavy, but it certainly sort of tips the scales a bit more than the previous cameras we were looking at. But yeah, it's sort of high concept. It's still a compact, but there's a lot more going on underneath the skin than maybe some of the other cameras that we've been talking about. Another good example of this class of camera. Yes, it is a camera. It's not something that was trying to invade Earth in a 1980s sci-fi film. This is from Minolta. It's an APZ, also known as the Riva Zoom 105i. So again, this has got a zoom lens. You zoom out using these sort of video game style buttons. It's got various flash modes, self timer, but it looks a little bit like an early video camera or early digital camera. But no, it's a film camera. Again, a really well specified lens. This one is a 35 to 105 lens. At the 35mm end, it's f.4, and at the 105, it's 6.7, which is not far off a good zoom lens used for SLRs. Again, with both of these cameras, you're not talking about a lot of money to be getting a working example of these. You can often find these short shot zooms for 50, 60, 70 quid. Similar price usually for the Rivas if they're in working condition. I've talked before about perhaps some models being a bit delicate, but these short shot Zoom XLs, I'm not sure I've found a Zoom XL that either wasn't working or couldn't be brought back to life. The electronics aren't delicate. It's all housed in a really robust body. So again, a really good choice for photography for somebody who wants to have a bit of control over the pictures they're taking rather than necessarily giving all the control to the camera. I hope this video has been useful. Hopefully it gives you a decent impression of the kinds of compact cameras that are out there from this golden age of compact camera design and the ones still being made today. Which kind of camera is right for you will ultimately depend on what kind of images you're wanting to take. And also, how much control you want over taking those pictures. Do you want to leave it all up to the camera? Or do you want more control? Do you want to just take simple, no fuss pictures on a sunny day? Or do you want something that can maybe take some moody portraits, in a bar at night? That's up to you, but you'll find a camera amongst this sort of vast range of compacts that should be able to do most of the things that you want. I'm just going to leave it with a quick mention of my online camera shop, Camera Bureau, where you can find compact cameras like this. You'll see a link to Camera Bureau in the text underneath the video. And we have cameras like this Hanimex IC500 for £10, so not a lot of money. We have other cameras that have been film tested, and you can see results taken on the camera. So recently I've had cameras like this Sure Shot. These cameras come with a 3-month warranty, and film tested cameras, compact cameras, start from around £25. So hopefully pretty affordable for people. And yes, I will post overseas, not just for UK viewers. And also, if you want to read more about various compact cameras, or indeed, any other kind of camera, then make sure you check out Kosmo Foto, the blog, where there's loads of articles about compacts and all sorts of other camera designs. And yeah, please like and subscribe to the channel, and hope to see you soon.